Welcome to the Garden Talk podcast, where we interview growers from all over the world, both beginners and experts, seeking to learn more about what they know about gardening and how they do things in their garden. What's up, everybody? For those of you that don't know me, my name is Chris, aka Mr. Grow It, and you're tuned into the Garden Talk podcast. This is episode number 176. In this episode, I interview Cooper from Sustainable Village. He has been gardening for 23 years and is widely regarded as an expert in irrigation, which is the focus of today's episode. He talks about soil tension, texture, the moisture release curve, tips on automated watering systems, and much more. If you want to see short clips of these podcast episodes, search Garden Talk clips on YouTube. I also have a gardening channel where I show the plants that I grow. Both of those channels will be linked down in the YouTube description section below. One of my goals for this podcast is to bring free information about gardening to the general public. That being said, I'd like to thank the sponsors of today's episode who help make that goal possible. Thanks to AC Infinity for sponsoring this episode. Check out their dehumidifiers. They have smart controls, which let you automate humidity, VPD, timers, and fan speeds, precision dehumidification, so you can maintain specific moisture levels, built-in dual ports to support both intake and exhaust, and it connects to the UIS platform, giving you full app control and integration with other AC Infinity devices. There's more to it, so click the link in the description section below so you can learn more about their dehumidifiers, and the discount code MrGrowIt15 works on both Amazon and their website, acinfinity.com. Stash Blend. Several additives in one blend, so you no longer have to buy individual bottles. Check it out at stashblend.com, link in the description section below, and use the discount code THESTASH. And we are back, and I'm joined with Cooper from Sustainable Village. How you doing today?
Doing well, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the podcast today. Ran into you at the DGC Cup 2025. Incredible event, huh?
That was so much fun. Yeah, I'm really glad that I found out about it in time and was able to come and yeah, have a booth, and I entered some concentrate even in that second day there. Yeah, it was a great time, great atmosphere, and awesome people.
Yeah, it was my first time going there, and I'm definitely going back in the future, that's for sure. But we had a good conversation while we were there, and we wanted to get you onto the podcast. You have so much good information in regards to really a part of soil science, which is the moisture level in the medium. Watering is really what we want to focus in on in this conversation. There's so many different things that we can get into, granular details that aren't really widely spoken about much. So I hope to get into some of those things with you today. But first, before we get too deep into it, can you give us an introduction? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into gardening?
Yeah, I was, a big fan of the, plant medicine that I think we're all fans of here. And I think I just kind of fell in love with it. I was out here in Colorado, was kind of part of the scene here back in like with the friends I had, and so I was exposed to it and would trim and be around and kind of started that way, and then got taught by, the people I was working for and put some lights up, and then, it's been a long journey since then, but I started taking it pretty serious when the medical came online here in Colorado in 2008 and 2009, and then, have been having the plant as my main focus here for quite some time. So I've kind of tried a bunch of different things, but I'm a customer here is how I found Blumat. I found Michael Box is my neighbor up there, and he introduced me to the Blumat product, and the light bulb went off, and I was like, that's what I've been looking for. This is what I need to kind of fill in the puzzle that I was working on. So, and have been, using them ever since. I'm really excited about being here, to having found a job, some would say career here at Sustainable Village. So, really, really excited to hopefully, share anything I can with you and your audience.
Fantastic. Yeah, you mentioned Michael Box. He was on the podcast twice before. Definitely a fan favorite. I had some great conversations with him. And so, I'm excited to kind of tap into your knowledge. Also working at Sustainable Village. I know Michael's not there anymore. You've taken over his role. Plus, it seems like you're wearing a lot of hats over there at the moment. So,
yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm doing, I I just have kind of like this natural intuition with the product, and so I've been lucky enough to get put in a position where I could R&D it and work on it and be testing things all over all the time and talking to our customers, and so made tons of headway. But yeah, I'm trying to do customer service, tech support, write instructions, talk with the marketing team, and just there's a lot of hats to wear here in Sustainable Village, and which makes it a lot of fun, and I'm learning a lot. This is kind of my office job training wheels over here, so I'm learning a bunch of new skills at the same time. So yeah, it's been really it's great.
Gotta do what you gotta do to survive, so adapting is part of that. Let's get into the topic now. I really want to start with soil tension. We first start an intro here. Mentioned there are some things that we don't really talk about much. You don't hear people talking about much, and soil tension, I think, is one of those things.
Yeah, I mean, it's the force that it takes to get the water out of the media, and so it's what the plant is seeing at any given moment, right? It's how hard the plant has to work to move the water. And so it becomes a really valuable metric when you're looking, for a way to quantify what you're seeing in your media at any given time and be able to reproduce results. It's one of, the pieces in the, volumetric also plays as important, I think, of a role, but they both have their place, and without the other, they don't mean as much to me. So it's been a tensiometer. As I grabbed some props, like I was saying, this is an aerometer brand tensiometer. This is the 12-inch model. What it is a column of water, ceramic tip. As the soil tension pulls on it, when the soil dries out, it tries to move this water column. That pulls on this gauge and moves this vacuum gauge. So we can get a number of how hard that force is in the soil. And so that's the same technology that a Blumat uses, same thing, ceramic tip, column of water. And instead of pulling on a gauge, this pulls directly on a valve and opens and closes to match the water that's being removed from the soil by the plant and evaporation. So tension it's the language of the plant, and it's that's what you're seeing is exactly what the plant is seeing. And so volume is great, and I've been tracking volume a lot too lately. I've got a really nice pulse hub with like the 3-prong, they're Aclima sensors. So I got 3 beds running on those, and I've been here for 3 years now, paying a lot of attention to tension and volume. So there's a lot to be learned and extrapolated from all that data.
Understood. And soil tension really is going to be dependent on soil texture in some ways, right? So like some soil texture, we would talk about clay versus loam, sandy soils. How does soil texture affect water retention?
So the smaller the particles, the tighter it's going to hold on to that water. So that's where you get, fine, like clay type soil is going to hold it really, really tightly. And so we'll see numbers up in, we measure in millibar with the Blumat meter, but you can also measure in centibar, which is just a decimal place different. But we see numbers change dramatically from soil type, what your target would be. So in like a potting soil mix, you could be shooting for, 100 Mbar or 50 to 100 Mbar. And in like a clay-based soil, you'd be up towards 300 before you'd want to irrigate. And so it is wildly different. But most folks doing the style growing we're doing are in some type of like engineered mix or potting soil mix, cocoa peat type of a base. And so those numbers are all pretty similar to each other. Those medias all kind of respond the same. There's a thing called the moisture release curve where you're combining tension then with volumetric readings, and that's what's going to give you like the real the thumbprint of your soil there, exactly what you're working with, where the sweet spot is, and that is something that Izzy, who I worked here with, really he kind of found that in his research and really opened the door to that whole world, which has been really shown us a lot about what target you want to be shooting for. It gives you a lot of insight.
Can we get deeper into the moisture release curve? How does that work?
Yeah, so you put tension on one axis and volumetric on the other axis, and what you end up seeing is there's a spot where it's not a straight line, it's not linear. So volume is linear for the most part, but the tension moves pretty wildly. So you'll see, depending on the media type, the best example is rock wool, and the reason people use rock wool is because of its moisture release curve. It has a very forgiving moisture release curve, so you just end up seeing this area where it'll be a line like this with the steep part. The steep section is where you're seeing volume move a ton, but you're not seeing the tension move very much. So the plant doesn't know all this irrigation is happening. It's just seeing this nice sweet spot that it's living in. And that's where why rock wool is just so easy to manipulate, and you can really nail it. But when you get into this living soil or cocoa peat kind of based medias, it's more of a like just a 45-degree angle type of a line. And so they're moving together, but they're not moving perfectly, one to one. So where you'll see as it gets drier, it'll just all of a sudden flatline where the tension will go sky high and you haven't moved much volume. Same thing on the wet end. All of a sudden you'll hit this zone where it's too wet and you'll go to zero on your meter really rapidly. So there's just this area where you're able to comfortably irrigate and stay inside of, so that the plant doesn't see too much stress. But either end of, no matter what that curve looks like, either end is bad news, and you want to stay inside of, if you were to chart it, you would want to stay inside of the curve there, the steep part. But you can pull those graphs up. They're online. You can look at them and see for your media type. And it's not something, Izzy's was like, oh, we'll go weigh it and we'll do this and we'll actually create a moisture release curve. It's a lot of work. I don't know that you need to know exactly. I think enough work has been done, enough graphs have been made that you can there are some numbers to stay inside of. And I'm happy to kind of talk about those and different targets for different phases. What do you think most of your customers are in? Is it all over the map? We got people in cocoa, peat, soil,
all over the map. Cocoa, peat, for sure, I would say is probably the most common, which I know you mentioned 50 to 100 Mbar is kind of a good measurement for them. And just to kind of break it down for the folks that aren't really too familiar with it, over 100 Mbar would be considered too moist, potentially too wet.
It's the opposite. So unlike volume, so volume, right, is the percentage of water. So the higher percentage of water, the more water. With tension, the higher the tension, the less water there is, right? So that's what's creating the force, is the lack of water. So that's why you'll see the higher number on our scale, running on tensiometers, and you'll see the lower number. So that only helps complicate the situation, because we start talking about numbers heading in opposite directions. But yeah, it's the range that we're looking at is 50 to 100 Mbar is what we're calling a great middle ground. And if you can be a little bit wetter during veg, a little bit drier during flower, is kind of the consensus that I'm hearing from everybody out there. But I've seen it work really well. I've seen some stuff really like it really wet, and I've seen But what I haven't seen is stuff like it really dry in veg. So we can see different targets there for the different phases of development. We'll see people running wetter through veg and then drier through flower, but not vice versa. you know, it's really easy to see the stress point in veg compared to freely available water, which is again that's what that curve is pointing at, is where the water is freely available and the plant can just access it and move it really freely. So that's the that's what we're working with. It's not a huge range. Now on volume, we're moving backwards on the numbers, but if we were at 50, which is wet on my tensiometer, we would be at about 50%, which is wet on your volumetric, right? And then you're going to dry down to 100 Mbar, which is going to be more like 30%. And so that's going to be, so that's how, again, they don't move one to one, So somewhere in there, all volumetric sensors seem to be a little different. That's where tension is great, because I can give you a digital moisture meter and you can tell me your tension and I'll know that it's the same as mine. Where with the different volumetric readings, I see like 10% maybe sometimes between brands, and where it's hard to say, if you're telling me 35, the difference between 35 and 45 is a big difference. So it's hard when I'm on the phone with folks trying to talk through the moisture situation. It's tough to always know what everybody's talking about. So I really do lean heavy on the tensiometers, but even with tensiometers, there's a lot to understand there too. Like these style here come with the same gauge, whether you're on a short body or a long body, but the number will be different because this column of water is taller. It has actual head pressure, so that'll increase this number. So we'll see. You gotta that's what one of the points I did want to discuss here is, like, you gotta understand what you're looking at for what your meter is, and if there's where you're measuring, what you're measuring with. All those things are super important. So like one number is not a catch-all in any of these situations, whether that's volume or tension. It's more dynamic than that. So there's a lot of little details in there, but to keep it simple for people, I think having both is the way to start to wrap your head around it. So I really encourage people have both. My favorite thing about volume though is that we can track it on, everybody seems to nowadays have those the phone apps that show their graphing now and data logging all of their moisture readings, like what I see people running the EcoWits, and I see a lot of those graphs, and those are like just the greatest thing for me, because what it shows is the actual frequency of the watering event over time, right? Because any snapshot, so like any of those one time push it in, get a reading, it's tough. That picture is much more dynamic than that, and you need to understand that is a moving, you're looking at something that's constantly moving. So I love those data loggers to give you the true image of what's happening over time, because I could point you at any one number and you wouldn't know if it had just watered, was about to water. There's all those things come into play. So that's been a huge advancement in the tension, in the moisture monitoring world, and that's been really fun to work with people and get to see a bunch of those graphs. Has been great for me personally in my understanding. So I definitely encourage people to have both types of sensors to get the true picture.
I hear you. Yeah, 4 years ago, I was always mentioning in content that moisture meters are the future, and now more and more people are using moisture meters, and I have the EcoWit ones just like you mentioned, and I love looking at it because it's right on the app and you can see what the percentage moisture is. And I also have the Blumat moisture meter as well. But there is a big difference between soil texture and what the moisture meter is showing on the app as a percentage. For example, I use Fox Farm Ocean Forest soil, and I also use Bioflower soil. Two completely different types of soil, right? The Fox Farm Ocean Forest soil is heavier in peat versus Bioflower is heavier in cocoa. And so I look at my EcoWet moisture meter, and my plants are almost overwatered if they're at 30% in Fox Farm, but they get up to 40, sometimes touch 50% in Bioflower, and they're completely fine. So I totally agree with you. Like, for folks to actually get the experience, go out and, get some of these moisture meters, whether it be a Blumat one or an EcoWet or whatever, and kind of play around with it a little bit. And you'll get a feeling, and you'll be able to read your plants and look to see what it says on moisture meter, and you'll find out at what point they're happy.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like cocoa can run wetter. It's just the nature of the way that curve would look. Your sweet spot's going to be in a wetter zone than you are with peat, and so you've got that's one thing to consider when you're looking at these numbers. I mean, another thing to consider is how you're watering and what that what that looks like too, because you can run the same exact media irrigated different ways and have a different sweet spot. So there's, it's a pretty dynamic picture, but if you can have something like the Blumat that's watering slow, or a capillary mat, or if you're on like one of the capillary, or like what is it? I'm always spacing competitors' names. I hesitate to drop them, but that the tray to grow and autopot and all that stuff. You get the wicking or the sip containers, all that stuff. Anything that's wicking around like that, and I consider the Blumat to be in that category. You can see wetter numbers and also see great results because you're holding all that pore space as that water wicks around, where if you're doing a top watering event, you're pushing that water out of the pore space. And so you're actually changing the dynamic of that media based on how you're watering. So there's a lot to consider. It's also, there's only so much that's like actionable, you can only just kind of watch and make observations and be tracking and say, this is what's working. I mean, the other thing at play is the strains are wildly different with what they'll tolerate. Some things, but again, it's not that different. And unless you were watching with a meter, you wouldn't be able to know what you had done differently. You wouldn't know that you were running one, because it's almost non-detectable. The difference is if you were trying to pick up a container or stick your finger in, you're not going to get the nuance of, you were 20 Mbar off or 10% volumetric off, but that will make a difference in like the morphology too, like the bud structure and things like that. There's a lot you can do with the moisture levels when you have a way to control them.
Genetics. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. It can definitely vary upon genetics on kind of what they can handle and stuff like that. I've seen examples of that happening. It's kind of surprising to see, actually, such a variation just due to genetics. Now, you brought up the way you water, and I think we have quite a few folks that are kind of split on the way they're watering. A lot of folks are doing natural hand watering from the top, usual soil drench. But we have more and more people going to that bottom watering, like you mentioned, that wicking system. Can you talk to us about kind of the differences between the two, and what do you personally prefer and why?
Yeah, I mean, it's so much of it depends on your container, but yeah, obviously I like the Blumat system because we're kind of doing the best of both worlds. The wicking thing is amazing because, again, it holds all the pore space, and you're giving, especially in organics, you're giving that soil a chance to really get cooking, really get churning with life, and really get that availability up. And so I'm seeing really great results when you can run in that wetter area. Now we have, I have a lot of customers hand watering and using moisture meters that I talk to, and I know that, but what you're gonna hear from those people is they're gonna like a drier number. And the reason they're gonna like a drier number is because their soil can't handle that top watering event all the way down to, say, to the same level that we can wick to and get the same and get better results. So you'll have, that's where you'll hear the number 100 Mbar, and people start talking about higher numbers than that. Those are all usually hand waterers that like that number way up there, and that's because they're going from extreme to extreme and they're passing along that curve as they go. And so they don't want to water until they get way up there, because they're also then going to be at the other end of that scale until they dry back out. So it's that's another factor when you're listening to and going, on some of these forums and hearing different numbers people throw around. If you're going to try to match someone's number, you should also be considering how they're doing it, because it's all going to have something to play with it. But watering from the top is really it works great, but not so much in like the living soil peat cocoa thing. It just doesn't. The soil profile itself is always moving around in interesting ways, and you got to be really good at not hitting runoff if you're going to water from the top. There's just so many things at play there with the plant's usage and everything else, trying to get that perfectly right without pushing runoff in a living soil situation. In hydro, it's easy because you want runoff. A lot of people want that certain percentage of runoff to reset that media every single time, and that's that's one of the great perks of hydro, is that you have that ability to be like, I pushed 10 or to 15% runoff, I'm good, But with some of these other hand waters, or people in tents, who don't want water everywhere, don't have a way to evacuate that water in a way that's reliable, it becomes harder and harder to get the results you want without, in my mind, a Blumat or one of those wicking style sip containers. It's really pretty remarkable what just the capillary action of soil. It does a great job. It's really pretty magical. Now, watering from the top, a lot of times you've got to worry about drying out from the bottom up, and watering from the bottom, you got to worry about drying out from the top down. So that becomes super important too, and where you're measuring that container and what you're actually measuring at any given time. Like in a container water that's irrigating from the bottom, I want to be measuring at the top, and in a container watering from the top, I want to be measuring at the bottom, because you want to be sure that you're catching the whole picture there, and I see really interesting things happen, especially in large beds, in larger containers. Hand waterers tend to be a lot drier, deeper than they think, because they're being, tentative on their watering, because they don't want to overdo it. And so what happens over time is that it dries from the bottom up. And same thing in a sip container, left alone over time, it's going to dry more than you want up at the top. Now, for me, the disadvantage of that is, in organics, that's where you're putting all your amendments. That's where all of the life is. That's, you want to keep that top zone fairly moist and alive. That's where the worms are. And so I think that the best of both worlds is to have the Blumat system watering from the top, but so slowly that that the media is acting like it does in a sip container, holding all that airspace and wicking around really slowly. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. And I see crazy results here. It's so fun to be dealing with, as many growers as I get to talk to on a daily, weekly basis is really, it's pretty fun. And so I've been, working on getting that correct with this Blumat system, and I've just been, thrilled with what people have been doing out there. So it's, I definitely think I like yeah, the best of both worlds thing where you're watering from the top, but so slowly that it wicks around.
The Blumat system definitely does make things a lot easier, and we'll get deeper into the Blumats here in a little bit. First thing I do want to cover is something that a lot of folks really aim for when they're doing that initial mending, which is field capacity. Now, we got a lot of beginner growers that are tuning into this that don't even know what field capacity is. So can you break it down for us? What is the concept of field capacity, and how does it tie into the Blumat system?
So it's, field capacity is when you can't fit any more water in that container. It's going to come running out. It's what people call runoff, that point of runoff. And that's where you've maxed out what that container can hold. And it is a good, it's something you need to know. It's really nice that's where how I would, the easiest way to calibrate at least that end of your sensor, right, is you're going to be able to say like, oh, runoff on my volumetric is at 60% because I saw water come out of the bottom of my container when I got up to 60%. And same thing on I know on a tensiometer, the runoff is going to be at about 25 in any normal media that we're working with. And so it's a great number to know, but it's one end of the spectrum, right? The hygroscopic water is the other end of that spectrum where you can't get any more water out. So that's going to be permanent wilt up there, where the plant just cannot remove any more water. But yeah, that's field capacity is good to know because you don't want to be there. You want to be drier than that. A lot of people at transplant will go to field capacity because they can't help it. They're not thinking about the volume of water at which they're doing it, and they overshoot it, they overwater, water comes leaching out the bottom of your container at that point. And so it's an interesting number to know and to stay away from. Again, on a tensiometer, it's going to be at about 25 Mbar. And the only way to get a wetter reading off of a tensiometer is to put it in a glass of water. Because otherwise, that's like really the only way to get it to be any wetter than reading of about 15. So 15 to 20. So it's something that you want to avoid, but at the same time, there are places where you would want to run near it, close to field capacity, which, yeah, at transplant and on capillary matting, or if you were to get a reading on your sip container down at the bottom, you would see that water that down there being right at field capacity at the bottom of one of those sip containers. And that's what gives it the ability to then continue to wick up and around.
That's interesting you say to avoid it. I know quite a few people who kind of aim for that, particularly in myself as well in the past. I've aimed for it for the initial mending. So I'm mixing up soil. I add in my fertilizer, for example, add in any aeration, whatever, and then moisten it to where it's at field capacity. And the way I was kind of explained how to kind of, just a way you can do it with your hands is you squeeze the soil. And when you open up your hand, it should clump up, but it shouldn't be any powdery. And then when you squeeze it, there shouldn't be any drops of water coming out of it, right? So no drops of water. And when you open it, it's clumped. And so that's typically what I would aim for when I was doing the initial planting. So I'd mix up the soil, for example, get to field capacity, put it into containers, and then plant to it. And I usually had a pretty good result doing that. But what you're saying kind of makes sense. Maybe it is heavier on the Mbar. Maybe I do need to kind of back off and I could get a little bit better result by running a little bit drier.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's tough to decide where that handful comes from and what, but yeah, I definitely, when I'm going to transplant or whatever, I definitely wet my soil down and don't want it to be, muddy. You don't want it soupy.
Understood. I want to get into Blumats next. Now, this is something we had a lengthy conversation in person at the DGC Cup. Really, really good conversation. And one of the things that you had mentioned, which really opened up my eyes, and I think is going to open up a lot of the audience eyes here, is the actual calibrating of the Blumats. Now, common knowledge in the past was you would dial in your Blumat carrot, you'd stick it in, and you would get it to where there was one drop hanging off. And then you would dial those back 2 triangles, and then it would be good. Now, you had mentioned in person that is actually incorrect. There's actually a better way to go about it. And there's also preset Blumats these days that are going to take that guessing out of the picture for you at all. Can you get into that a little bit?
Yeah, so the normal Blumat process was to take the things, put them together underwater, and then insert them in the soil, wait for 15 minutes or, soak them for 15 minutes, put them in the soil and wait, and have, then they would have instructions that said get to 100 Mbar and then try to set your sensor. Now they kind of had combined a bunch of different directions. The original Blumat directions, yes, say 2 triangles closed, but it's just so much more complicated than that. The Austrians have a way of oversimplifying, especially this product. So basically, the way this thing works is it's gonna read. Once you put it in the soil, it comes alive, and there's a vacuum created in here, and so any dialing you do on any given sensor, once it's put together, is going to be like dialing it on top of like having put your finger on a scale, and then weigh something. So you've got forces at play inside that sensor that you're not accounting for. So if you were to take the same sensor, do the exact same 2 triangles closed in a container that was 50 Mbar, you're going to end up at just, at closer at like 120 Mbar. If you do it in soil that's 100 Mbar, you're going to be at close to 200 Mbar. So you can take 10 containers that are watered slightly different, put in 10 sensors, dial them all identically, and they're going to then match that difference on the other end once they're set. So the wetter container is still going to be wetter. The drier container is going to end up drier. So the way we got around that is, if we're trying to avoid the force inside of this tube, I figured out after playing with these things that the easiest way to get rid of the force inside the tube is just get rid of the tube, hook it up to water like this, and then you're setting it on the same baseline. Every sensor is the same as every other sensor, and you can then do your 2 triangles closed and reliably have them all give you the same result out the other end, no matter what that container is at. So if you put if you dial it like this, and if you dial it with the top off the bottom, and then you put it in a container, if the container is below the set point, it's going to wait to turn on. If the container is drier than the set point, it's going to turn on right away as soon as it acclimates. So instead of doing it per pot, we started dialing just the sensor itself. And so because it just happens to be that this is now dry, I can send these to people. So then I started marking them, and then I realized, Blumat's always had these caps, these protective caps, so I can do my mark, do my setting, make my mark, slide this cap on, and send it to you, and then I can predict what level you're going to hit when you install that. Through all this playing around with these things, I realized how pressure sensitive they are, and that's another part of the picture, is that the folks' gravity setting on a gravity system is different than setting on a pressure system, and the results are different. I found that out from flip-flopping them, dialing something on a gravity system and bringing it over to a pressure system, and they just force open. So then conversely, you bring one that worked on pressure over to a gravity setup, and it would run super dry. So I was able to kind of chart those differences, and now we have instructions that are that take the pressure into account. So we've got like 3 different pressure levels here, and you can see the lower pressure for like a gravity setup. The medium, we have pressure reducers that do 7 to 7.5 to 10, and then we've got adjustable pressure reducers and the regular Blumat ones that do this higher one. So the same setting but different pressure will give you a different result. So if you see like, you'd want to be over here by the red mark for gravity, where you're going to want to be over here by the blue mark for the higher pressure. And so those things, like they used to have, the directions were just one step. Do the thing, hanging drip, tube closed. And it's just so much more complicated than that. And that complication, luckily, I get to handle here by just getting them set to that proper range, and then you can make that one-time little adjustment to get to where you are for your system and your goal, and then you can hit it day one. Now, setting the Blumat the old way is awesome if you understand what you're doing. I can walk up to a container and put in a Blumat, and that the hanging drip in a container. So here's a concept that people they have a hard time with. The hanging drip moves, right? So it's not always in the same place. It's moving. The hanging drip is representing the moisture level in that pot at that moment. So if you walk up to a container and you find the hanging drip, that would then, and you just get it to click to close where it's not dripping, and you just freeze that drop in time at the end of the tube there. That is going to set that container to exactly where it is at that moment. So then from there, if you like that setting, then boom, you're there, you're set. If you need it drier, you need to tighten on top of that hanging drip. If you want it wetter than where it currently is, you need to open it up from that hanging drip. So that's kind of the old paradigm, and that was driving me insane here trying to customer service that. Because it just, is it wet? Is it dry? What's the drip? What's not the drip? Is it an arrow on the thing? Is it a triangle? What are we talking about? It was really hard to manage. So, and get everybody to understand. And so now with the preset sensor, that is all, we don't have to deal with any of those steps or conversations. I don't need to know. The customer doesn't need to know what their container is currently set at in order to properly set their sensor. And in fact, even without a digital moisture meter, you really can rely on the setting and this chart to get you close to where you want to be without a meter. And so that's been, a total game changer, but it's really fun for scaling and getting, we've got people buying 1,000 of these sensors at a time now, where before that process just wasn't doable. There was no good way to install a Blumat and walk away. And now that's where we're at with it. It used to be, in the directions from Germany, it also says circle back for 2 weeks. And so that's where I just didn't find those instructions and that dialing method to be good enough for what we needed to do in this space with, people commercially with their livelihoods on the line. And, so I just been really lucky that we found that, I was able to stumble across this new dialing method and that it's worked and been as reliable as it's been. So it's super, super cool. And I really encourage everybody to try it. It's a whole different paradigm, how you're looking at the things. But I am, it came out of a process of Izzy and I were like, we need to demystify this thing because they're like magic. It feels like in the beginning with you get a Blumat and you're like, oh, it's doing it. Don't touch it now, and that's a thing of the past. I really want people to understand what they're looking at and be able to, have confidence to pull the sensor out and take it apart and put it back together and put it back in and know they're going to be right where they were. So that's been really exciting.
It sounds like it makes things a lot easier. I'm going to have to pick up some of those preset Blumats myself because, if I don't have to sit there and tinkle in order to dial them in, let the drop hang and then set it a certain way, then if it takes all that guesswork out of there, sign me up. I'm on board.
So you get that, you'll get that instructions that kind of tell you where to go based on your system pressure. And then there's marks underneath the cap. So you can see that silver mark and then there's a red mark. So again, those correspond to that chart, and then you get this key, which is just a surfboard fin key that we had them put Blumat on, and so now you can reach into the cap. You don't have to take this cap off ever, and you can just reach in through the cap and move that setting based on your system pressure and what your goal is. And you can do that at install, right? So you can get the things out of the box, reference the instructions, make the one-time adjustment, and say, oh, I want to be right between these two marks. And then now all you have to do is hold them underwater. There's no more waiting 15 minutes. Like, you have to soak them for 15 minutes, but you don't need to worry about waiting after you put them together before you set them. Or there's just a bunch of steps that get cut out, a bunch of booby traps and pitfalls in the old instructions that no longer are relevant because we kind of gotten around them all by doing this for you, bench calibrating them.
Well, it's awesome to see that there's some innovation going on there at Sustainable Village. I know you guys had the drip rings, which, geez, I think it's been over a year now since you guys have had those come out. I've been using those. Those have been really cool. What else do you guys have, like, either that just came out recently or you got in the works that you'll be releasing here soon?
Yeah, so the drip rings were an awesome addition because, again, for scale and just for knowing what everyone's container looks like, it's been a major breakthrough, right? So for me, as somebody on the phone here, I want to know what every single person's container looks like, where their sensor is from the drip points. With the drippers, it was like how far, there's just so many things you can do differently. And same thing with like spirals and things, like, is everyone's spiral starting in the middle and going to the outside, or people are putting sensors in the outside? So having the drip rings now, at least I know what everyone's container looks like. I can tell them where to place their sensor in their container, which would be, I'm always recommending half the distance from the stalk to the outside of their container, so split the radius, and then half of the profile. So if you've got, a 10-inch container, you want to be 5 inches down. If you've got a 12-inch container, you want to be 6 inches down. And that's been a great place to start. But yeah, previously things were all over the place, and that's where a lot of the funky results were coming from, was everyone was doing something different. And so the drip rings have really helped that. We've also then, same principle, leaned more into just the manifold straight line of drip tape kits, and using one sensor per container is also kind of a newer thing that we used to sell two sensors, a 5 and a 9, and all these different configurations. We definitely lean now heavier into the 9 being the sensor of choice. I think of it as adjustable. So that's kind of the stuff that's been around but is sort of looked at a little bit differently. And then there's the main big innovation is the new pump kit in conjunction with the new adjustable pressure reducer. Both those, we've had pump kits for years, and we've had the adjustable pressure reducer for a couple of years now. But pairing them together in a version for a tent grower is what I was going after, because I had the experience switching from gravity to pressure of being like, wow, this is how these things work. Holy smokes. Like, they're so much more accurate and so much more reliable than I'd ever thought possible. And so that's the version of, the product that I want more people to see. So worked hard to get this new mini pump kit out that is, for people looking whose grows are like 50 gallons of water a day or less, right? So the normal gravity customer that would be struggling to figure out how to get 50 gallons of water up in the air high enough, water's really heavy. And so that's a challenge for people trying to figure out, people have multiple reservoirs. I talk to people that have, a reservoir per tent kind of a thing going on. And so those are the customers that I really think the new pump kit is perfect for. They can, or if you want to be able to leave on vacation and have enough water to make it through, for a weekend or whatever that may be, you can just match the right size reservoir with the pump kit, and you can be gone for as long as you'd like. So that is a huge innovation, and the adjustable pressure reducer in combination with the new preset sensors is just another level of precision, because we're matching, done a lot to match the flow rates with what the sensors are capable of, which previously was something used to be thought of as an advantage to Blumat. Like, you don't even have to worry about flow rate. Like, it just keeps up, and like it'll catch up eventually. But that was one of the issues people had was underpowered systems, and so they would see inconsistent results. So the new pressure reducer delivers within a PSI from like full system use, to like a shut system. So we're seeing like barely any fluctuation in pressure, and that's led to just very consistent results. Again, one of the problems people had with their system is they would set their sensor and then they would come back and think that it was too dry because it used to be right and now it's too dry, so they'd open it up and then it would be too wet, and then they'd come back and close it down and it'd be too dry. And what's really happening is in the background their pressure was changing, and so at any given moment they're going to come and see a sensor that appears too dry. But once they open it up and the other things close, and now the pressure builds back up, and so now that one's overwatered, and you close this other one, and there's people chasing their tails, and it turns out it's all from inconsistent pressure, because otherwise you do not need to continuously adjust a Blumat. It can be as simple as one and done, and then you can watch that thing perform all the way through the life cycle of the plant and hold an incredibly tight margin when you do size everything appropriately. So some of what's new is just like all the new way of thinking about it. But the other thing that adding the pump kit has now opened the door to is new tape. We have a new drip tape that we're using that requires higher pressure, that 15 psi. And that has been a game changer commercially. And also, there's just certain folks that had problems with the blue soak tape over time from water quality issues, primarily, where they'd be growing algae inside of the tape. It's that white Tyvek tape. Looks like this. And it works amazing and does things that no other tape will do. It'll run at, 1.5 psi and let water out evenly. Nothing else does that. And so it's really amazing for that. But when you're getting, when you have issues with it, and it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So I've been running the white tape for years without problems, but I talk to people on the phone all the time that have constant problems with it. So the need kind of arose to find a different solution, and so we started testing all types of different tape and found something that works at these higher pressures. And so I've been really thrilled to get that out over the last 6 months. I put out over 20,000 feet of this new drip tape, and it's been working extremely well. So it's been really fun to see people who thought they were having Blumat sensor-related problems, who were really having tape-related problems, and then everything just solves itself once you get, the right distribution method paired with the right system pressure, once all those things are correct. So, there's a couple new things, but they're just old things kind of reimagined and truly, fleshed out. All that new tape is just a one-to-one replacement for the old tapes. If you have the old system, it's literally as simple as just swapping the tape and moving over to that higher pressure, and you'll be able to get all the performance of what we're doing in like the largest facilities out there. And we've got some decent size ones. I think I think I have that new tape running in about 1,500 4x8s in the recreational market today, right now. So that's super fun. But mostly, yeah, new understanding and just better, simpler designs that are repeatable for folks. And then, yeah, I'm working on instructions and a user manual, which is like amazing that we've gotten away with it without having one for so long. But there's just so many little nuanced things, that so many bases to cover, that I'm really excited to be able to have all the information in one place, because I get a lot of calls where people are like, I watched every video and it seems like there's 5 ways to do everything. And it's true. There's, over time, this has progressed, and so old information is not as applicable, and you never know with Blumat stuff if these streams are, if you're crossing streams or not. Again, it's, if somebody's telling you about the hanging drip and you're not sure if they're doing it with the cap on or off, or what their soil level is, or all these different things. So trying to get all the source of truth into one place, so that, at a glance, people can figure out their issue, and find it in a little document online and be able to fix their problem.
Definitely sounds like there's lots of good improvements over there. So nice job there. Now, as we wrap things up here, can you tell listeners how they can find you?
I'm here at, on the Sustainable Village office line. You can usually catch me. I'm extension 1018. But you can find me on Instagram at, my account is Upaya Garden, UPAYA Garden. And I'm on there doing kind of testing stuff in real time on Instagram, and then answering customers at night and on weekends and things, because I really encourage people to reach out to me, because I have the answers. You just, so I don't want to have people waiting over the weekend when they've got a problem with their plants. I want people to be able to, it's usually something little that they weren't thinking about. But yeah, so you can reach me at the Sustainable Village office line. You can reach me on Instagram that way. Our Blumat Watering Systems account, or our Sustainable Village account, if you ask how to get a hold of me, they'll put you in touch with me. And yeah, so I'm around, and I'm making a living here talking to growers all day. And so, yeah, I encourage people to call, and chat. I got 15 minutes, for anybody at any given day, so they may have to be patient. I'm in meetings, and there's only one of me to be on the phone at a time. So, but I will take the time. Anybody that needs help, and so that's the best way to get a hold of me.
I'll definitely have a link to the Sustainable Village website down in the YouTube description section below, so you guys can easily get to it. And Cooper has been nice enough to hook up the audience, you guys, with a discount. You can use discount code Mr. Grow It specifically for my audience here. So thanks, Cooper, for hooking everybody up there.
Yeah, thank you.
And yeah, man, thanks for coming on to the podcast. This has been great talk. Lots of good insight here. I'm sure that there has been a ton of things that my audience has learned. So thank you so much for taking the time to fill us in on some of your knowledge. Well, I definitely want to give a big shout out to the folks that support on Patreon, patreon.com/Mr. Grow It. 100% of what is supported through Patreon goes right back into the podcast. You keep this podcast going, so thank you so much. The folks being scrolled on the screen right now are in the producer tier. Special thanks to you for your contributions. Cooper, once again, thank you so much for coming on, man. Really, really appreciate it. And yeah, hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you too.
Peace out, everyone. Catch you in the next episode.